It all started in the cafe on Totter's Lane. The place was nearly full, but I'd managed to get a table to myself in the back room. I had my headphones in and I was reading an old sci-fi paperback, a collection of Philip K. Dick's short stories, when I noticed someone walking in the room looking for a table. About my age, fresh-faced, slim with piercing blue eyes and long brown hair. Clothes were a bit unusual. A vintage suede jacket, black jeans and Doc Martens. Very striking, actually. But the thing about them was, you couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl. The loose clothing gave nothing away, and the way they moved wasn't either obviously masculine or obviously feminine. There wasn't a free table, but they had a good look through the newspaper rack by the door. Meanwhile, I'm trying to work out their gender. Of course, he or she catches me staring, so I look away and bury my head in my book. I'm sure I was blushing. Next thing, they came over and asked if the seat next to me was free. So I moved my bag and went back to my book. But before they sat down, they asked if I was waiting for a date or something. I said I wasn't and put my headphones back in. They sat down next to me and then said, oh, it's always best to check, because these coffee chains thrive on the dating scene. Some joke about it being appropriate because people like to choose a partner like they choose a cup of coffee. You know, like a tall, sweet, strong, black. I said, or a small, flat white. And we caught each other's eyes for the first time, and yeah, anyway, I went back to my book, but they kept on talking. Something about dating apps treating people like commodities. Like how everyone thinks they know exactly what they want, but how it leaves no room for the magic of chance, no happenstance, no serendipity. It's a good choice of words. So here I am in conversation with this curiously attractive person, and I still can't work out if it's a boy or a girl. I didn't have a clue. Not from the body language, the gestures, not even the voice. So I introduced myself, thinking once I know their name it will clear up the matter, but it turns out they call themselves Blue. So that wasn't much help. Anyway, we continue talking about the dating game, and then Blue mentions how people like to categorise both themselves and their ideal lover. How people like to put themselves into neat little boxes in order to appeal to a perfect partner, and then dress and decorate their home as if they've just stepped out of a Sunday supplement, all carefully crafted to make them seem like a better catch. I've often thought the same thing myself. You wonder where the real person is beneath all that stuff. Blue says you won't get anywhere unless you fit into some nice clean category, professional, solvent, all the right interests. I suggested that travel, skiing and going down the gym twice a day would be very popular. Then Blue picks up my paperback and says I wouldn't want to mention that because it would really ruin my chances. So it turns out Blue's into sci-fi as well, particularly Philip K. Dick. So we get talking about his writing and how some people think it's uncool to like sci-fi, as opposed to a more socially acceptable hobby like watching a group of overpaid reprobates kicking a leather sphere around a field. Blue said most people just want to follow the crowd so they can fit in, be one of the lads. Then Blue mentions that they're showing the director's cut of Blade Runner at the BFI. It turns out neither of us have ever seen it on the big screen. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we've arranged to see it together a week on Saturday. The day after this encounter in the cafe, Sarah and I were waiting for Ron at the Union Bar. They're my best mates, Sarah and Ron. I wasn't going to say anything at first, but Sarah could tell there was something on my mind, and she eventually managed to prise it out of me. So I have to tell her all about Blue and how I didn't know whether they were a boy or a girl. That Blue was sort of deliberately ambiguous. Turns out, androgynous is the word to use. Sarah's good with words. So that's how you describe Blue then? And very erogenous. Then Ron arrived and I tried to change the subject, but then Sarah goes and tells him that I've got a date with a cutie called Blue, and Ron asks if she has blue eyes. So I said yes, but Sarah said, whoa, not necessarily a she. So I have to admit that I can't tell if Blue's a girl or a boy. Ron asks if it was very dark when we met. Then Sarah mentions the word androgynous and Ron asks if Blue's seen a doctor. I wish she hadn't told Ron, he was bound to take the piss. Ron said he's as open-minded as the next man, woman or transgender individual, but you need to know where you stand, otherwise I could be in for a very unpleasant surprise. Sarah said she thought it was great that we were putting the whole gender thing aside, but Ron wasn't convinced. Far from it. I said, whatever their gender, Blue just isn't very masculine. I know I'm not attracted to masculinity. Then Ron points out that I'm attracted to masculine women, but maybe it's the feminine side of masculine women that I like. You know, the tomboy thing. Maybe I think they'll be more fun, and not just in the sack. Maybe I think I'll get on better with a tomboy because they'll share more of my interests. Than a more feminine girl, I mean. Let's face it, there aren't many feminine women out there that are interested in sci-fi, Sherlock Holmes and vintage motorbikes. If only. Then Sarah said that I've got more of an eye for a pretty girl than most men she knows, and how my eyes always light up whenever a hot girl walks in the room, particularly if she has a nice bum. Although surely that would be when she's walking out the room. When I arrived at the cinema, Blue was already waiting. We both got there early, but they hadn't opened the doors yet. It was a bit awkward at first, but then I noticed Blue was wearing this badge with a Celtic design. So I like all that stuff as well. Celtic, Viking, Anglo-Saxon. It's beautiful and somehow mysterious. Incredibly ancient, its origins lost in the mists of time. So we talk about that for a while, and Blue mentions that we should go to the V&A to see some doors from a Viking stave church. I pointed out that apart from liking Celtic design and sci-fi, I didn't actually know anything about Blue. I didn't know where they were from or what they did for a living or anything. But Blue said they don't want to be defined by what they do or where they're from, or anything else for that matter. I said I don't mind saying what I do. It's not really what I want to do anyway, so it doesn't exactly define me. I'm a part-time mechanic. I look after a collection of classic cars, but I'm trying to get into motoring journalism. Blue said that's my stroke, meaning mechanic stroke journalist. I hadn't heard of that before. So I ask if Blue has any strokes, and it turns out quite a few actually, but the main ones are conceptual photography and video art. But to make ends meet, Blue works at Forbidden Planet. I like video art as well, so we get talking about that, and I mention Bill Viola's fire and water stuff, but Blue finds it a bit cold, a bit too conceptual. Pipolotti Risht is Blue's favourite. Apparently her work's more personal, more from the heart. Now, I've often noticed that with female artists. Their work's more subjective, and so more interesting in a way, more engaging. More about their own personal experiences as women. With male artists, it's all political or conceptual. It's never intimate or revealing. They all seem to have their heads in the clouds. So, I ask if Blue's art is more personal or more conceptual. Apparently it's some of each. And sometimes both at the same time. I said that figures because the way blue presents themselves is sort of ambiguous. Blue asked if that was a problem for me, and I said that it wasn't, and then I was about to ask the obvious question when the doors opened. We dashed in to get a good seat. We had our second date yesterday. Blue picked this sort of bohemian wine bar in Fitzrovia. I asked if that was because Blue lived around there, but apparently not. Apparently somewhere in Limehouse in an industrial unit converted to life workspaces. So I was beginning to get some details. Then I asked where Blue was originally from, but Blue said, it's not where you're from that's important, it's where you're going. So I said, so where are you going? But Blue said, beats me. But at least now I could think of Blue as an East End person. But then Blue said where they live doesn't define them. So I said, okay, so how about where you'd want to live? If you could choose anywhere. And Blue said, well, it would have to be somewhere in London and it still wouldn't define them. Belgrave Square would be all right. I remembered that Oscar Wilde line and said, the north side or the south side? I'm a bit of a Wildian, you see. Oh, any other Ians Blue wanted to know? So I said Dickensian, Holmesian. Turns out we're both Sherlock Holmes fans as well, although Blue prefers Cumberbatch and I like Jeremy Brett. So, Blue said, you've got plenty of Ians, but how about any ists or ites? So I said humanist, feminist, Dawkinite, Corbynite. Then Blue suggested Marmite, but I can't stand the stuff. So I asked about Blues. Ists, ites, Ians and isms, but Blue said isms create schisms. I like that. So according to Blue, once you nail your colours to any mast, you create an opposition. You divide the world into people like us and the others. The enemy. Blue thinks everyone should have their own unique ideas and shouldn't compromise their opinions by trying to force them into some predefined ideology. Blue doesn't want to be defined by labels because they create a kind of straitjacket for ourselves. And once you pin one badge to your lapel, you tend to pin others to go with it. I asked if this principle applied to all aspects of Blue's life, particularly the most fundamental label of all, the first label anyone applies to another person, meaning, of course, male or female. But Blue said I was implying those are the only options. How about transgender, hermaphrodite, non-binary, gender fluid, genderqueer, and so on? Okay, I said, so male or female, or maybe a bit of both, or something in between. It'd be nice to know one way or another. Blue said that we seem to be getting on well and both find each other attractive and maybe things could go further, so does it really make a difference if they're a boy or a girl? I said I didn't know. Maybe it didn't. So, Blue said, it's just curiosity on my part, and that really isn't important. What is important is I like Blue for themselves. Whatever their gender, Blue doesn't want to label themselves or be labelled by others. Not according to race, social class, nationality, occupation, sexuality, or even gender. I said, I hope I was going to find out sooner or later. But Blue doesn't want to rush things. Blue really wants me to get to know them in a non-gender specific way first, and because they're not that sort of person. I think Blue almost slipped up there. It's kind of cute. I couldn't resist leaning over and and stroking Blue's cheek and chin. It's incredibly smooth. I suppose it could have just been a close shave. Then Blue said, "Try this," and leans over and kisses me passionately on the lips. Tongues as well. I wasn't expecting that. It was nice. It's very nice. Then Blue asks if I'm any the wiser, and I said, "No, not really." We've been meeting up 3 or 4 times a week, usually in a cafe or bar. At first, there's always a kiss at the beginning to break the ice, Blue said, and always a longer one before we parted. We get to snog a few times in the middle as well. But it's not just about kissing and holding hands. There's always so much to talk about. Time just flies by in Blue's company. It would seem like we've just arrived at a place and then 3 hours later we're the last people in the joint and the staff just want to go home. I got to hear about Blue's art projects as well. For the latest one, Blue got some friends to dress up in biblical clothes and staged a very realistic photo of the crucifixion with this daft-looking guy in the front taking a selfie. It was the latest in a series of historical scenes, all with the same selfie guy in the foreground. Blue calls the project the Time Traveller's Selfies. And we went to the V&A to see those Viking church doors. Oh, they are absolutely fantastic. About 1,000 years old, and in my mind, the most beautiful thing in London. Well, other than Blue. Yesterday, we had a picnic at Regent's Park. I noticed Blue was a bit quieter than usual. At first, I thought it might have been something I'd said, but it turned out Blue was a bit frightened about, well, us. I said I felt the same way. I've not really been in this situation before. Blue thought I was talking about the gender thing, but I wasn't actually. I admitted that, well, at first, I was hoping Blue turned out to be a girl, but as we got to know each other, it didn't seem to matter anymore. I genuinely meant that. I said it wasn't the gender thing that frightened me, but it was the love thing. Blue seemed genuinely surprised. Was I saying I was falling in love? I said it was getting that way. It turns out it was getting that way for Blue too. That's what was scary. I agreed. It was terrifying. Now I know what they call it, a roller coaster ride. Blue asked if I've ever been in love before, and I said that I haven't. Not really. But I have been on a roller coaster. I've been in lust several times before. Sometimes with girls I don't even like, but sometimes with girls that I do like, really like. But there's always been something missing. But then I suppose lust plus friendship doesn't equal love. But I never knew what I was missing. Blue asked if I did now. I said I didn't want to sound ridiculous, but there was something pure about my feelings for Blue. Like in the past, it's only ever been about sex. No, more than that. It's been about outer beauty, but with Blue, it's about inner beauty as well. It was difficult to put into words. Blue said I wasn't doing too bad, and that maybe I've just come up with the definition of love, something that poets have been trying to do for centuries. The recognition of a person's inner beauty. Blue said that's how they feel about me. I asked if that was just because we both like sci-fi and Sherlock Holmes, and Blue said, if we're being honest, that was a very big part of it. I arranged for Blue to finally meet Sarah and Ron. Sarah was already in the Prince Alfred when I arrived. She wanted to know how things were going and if we'd reached first base yet. I said, if you must know, we've snogged. She was doing her best to resist the temptation to ask the obvious question, so I had to tell her I still didn't know. Sarah was surprised to hear that I'd snogged Blue and still didn't know. I pointed out that human beings don't have their genitals in their mouths. She said actually they do from time to time, so I fell right into that one. Then Ron arrived and Sarah tells him that I've reached first base with Blue and I still didn't know. Ron said I must be hoping Blue turns out to be a girl. I said I'm hoping the relationship continues, whatever Blue turns out to be. Ron then said he's used to thinking of me as being one thing and now he doesn't know if I'm one thing or the other. Sarah asked, if Blue turns out to be a guy and that makes me gay, is that a problem for him? But Ron said that's not the point, and it wouldn't make me gay, that would make me bi. Then Sarah mentions that she met a girl at Bob's party who apparently said she was bi. We were both quite keen to hear a bit more, but it turns out she was bipolar. Anyway, Ron said it would be nice to know where he stood. So the problem with Ron is that he wants everything to be neat and labelled and unambiguous. The point is, I'm just attracted to Blue. Whatever Blue is. Sarah said that maybe I'm not bisexual. Maybe I'm attracted to Blue's androgyny, so I'm an androgynous-sexual. But Ron said you can't just go around inventing new words. I said I don't know why I need to have any kind of label. Sarah said that Blue's obviously starting to rub off on me, and that it's really romantic when a couple get together despite the difficult odds. You know, like a difference in class or race or the different sides in a war or a family feud like Romeo and Juliet. Sarah mentioned this one extreme example recently where a couple got married and it turned out that she was a Remainer and he was a Brexiteer. So there's no way that's going to work. Then Ron said at least they're not hiding their differences like Blue. He's always so fucking judgmental, applying his narrow-minded prejudices to others. I was starting to lose my rag with Ron, and I was about to take him to task for calling Blue it. Things were getting a bit heated when Blue finally turned up, so I calmed down and introduced everyone. We kissed, of course, and I could see that made Ron very uncomfortable. He then starts closely scrutinising Blue from every angle, but he doesn't say anything. I told him not to be so rude. And then he says that Blue's gone to a hell of a lot of trouble to disguise their sex, and that it's a very odd thing to do. He then said something about no tits to speak of. I told him he was going too far, and then he said it was me going too far with what he described as a fucking freak. I was about to swing for him when Blue stepped between us, asking him why he has such a problem. Ron then said something about 99% of people would think of Blue as being deviant. Blue said they're not interested in 99% of people, only in me, and that Ron is supposed to be my friend. Blue wanted to know why he has such a big problem, and can't he think for himself without referring to 99% of people, and hasn't he got a brain of his own inside of his thick skull? I was really proud to see how Blue stood up to him. Ron is nearly twice Blue's size, but Blue made him look really small. Anyway, Ron goes off in a huff and we don't see him again for the rest of the evening. Blue was concerned about coming on too strong, but no, Ron needed putting in his place. He was well out of order. Apparently it's not the first time Blue's had this sort of trouble. Sarah said it was probably from men who aren't secure in their own sexuality. Ron's not normally such an idiot. I don't know why it's such a big deal for him. Sarah said it's because we're in the same gang, so he thinks my choices reflect on him. This was a bit embarrassing, actually, because I hadn't got round to telling Blue about the Dark Riders. It's just a few mates into old motorbikes. It's not exactly a gang. It's a biker thing. But then Blue goes on about how people compromise their true nature when they try to fit into a gang, and can't we just be ourselves? But Sarah said, it's natural enough for people of our age to want to belong to a gang. It gives them a sense of identity, of belonging. Blue said that's fine, just as long as we don't all have to think alike. According to Blue, it's just lazy to take on an identity that's handed to you on a plate with a nice label attached. Apparently it's fine for me to like old motorbikes, but I don't need to call myself a biker because of all the baggage that goes with it. Blue said, I've already got the leathers, and before you know it, I'll be growing a huge beard next, getting a beer gut, not washing for weeks, and treating women like shit. And that is not going to happen. Except for maybe the beard. Sarah then asked if Blue's look is an expression of their sexuality. Blue said it's not just a look, it's a reflection of who they are inside. Androgyny is Blue's gender. I said, why just be one gender? Why not be both or neither? Sarah said we're obviously starting to influence each other. And in a way, we're a gang of two. Blue accepted this in so much as any couple is a gang of two. Sarah asked if we think of ourselves as a couple. We both said yes. And Sarah points out that that's one label Blue's happy to use. It seemed strange to be taking Blue home. I'd not told them much, but Mum could tell something was going on, so I admitted I'd met someone special. So of course, Mum's eager to meet Blue. The trouble is, Dad's not exactly Mr. Liberal-minded. He's always sitting in judgment. He has a permanent look of disapproval on his face. At least he does as far as I'm concerned. He treats me like a contrary child. He never respects my decisions. Whenever I do something a bit different, I always get that usual, "Oh, Peter," in a tone of voice which speaks volumes. When we arrived, Mum and Dad were already sitting in the front room, which we only use for special occasions, which is a bit daft in a small house, if you ask me. So I introduced everyone, and Mum gave Blue this sort of awkward hug, and then Dad obviously doesn't know whether to shake hands or give Blue a peck on the cheek. So Mum goes off to make a pot of tea and asks if Blue takes sugar. Blue doesn't, so we get the usual "sweet enough" from Mum. I couldn't stop myself saying, "I think so." And Dad says, "Do you now?" And then starts asking about Blue's Christian name, for obvious reasons. But it turns out Blue wasn't christened and isn't a Christian. Then Mum returns with the tea and says how I'm an atheist, but I correct her because I'm a de facto atheist. To say there definitely isn't a God is as stupid as saying there definitely is. Anyway, Blue tells them how they don't like to be labelled. Dad says, "I can see that," and goes back to asking about Blue's real name. It was like the fucking Spanish Inquisition. Dad says it's not often that I bring a partner home. Mum says how she always found that to be a funny term, partner, and tells Blue about how when Mr. Atkinson moved in next door, he asked if Mum had a partner, and Mum said no. She's not in business. Dad said it's a word that covers a multitude of sins, and says how Mr. Atkinson has a partner, but not in the business sense. His name's Gerald, and it turns out he knows Mum's cousin Frank. I ask if he's the one who left his wife and went off with the underchef at the Elms. You could cut the atmosphere with a knife. Eventually, Mum says how they do a very nice 3-course lunch at the Elms, and then they start talking about local hotels that will put on a good spread for non-residents. Then Dad asks if Blue has any brothers or sisters, and Blue mentions an older sister and a younger brother, and Dad says, one of each then. And Mum kicks him under the table. Then he asks if their names are Red and Green. So I tell him to stop taking the piss. Now actually, I'd had enough of this, so I suggested that Blue and I go upstairs to my room. It's the first time we've been alone together. I mean, not in a public place. So we're sat on my bed and start kissing. But when I tried to unbutton Blue's jacket, it was obviously the wrong move. Blue said, not yet. I've never seen Blue out of that jacket. It's like a suit of armour. Blue said maybe it is. I try not to show my disappointment. And I ask how Blue puts up with all the grief. Like, from my dad. Blue wants to ignore the issue of gender, but it seems to be the focus of every fucking interaction. Like, we couldn't have a normal conversation downstairs. It was dominated by just one thing. Dad didn't even try to get to know Blue as a person, irrespective of their fucking gender, and it's the only thing my friends want to talk about. Blue said they thought that we'd established it wasn't important, but everywhere we go, people stare. It's as if Blue has some strange disfigurement. Look what happened at the bar with Ron. That could have turned nasty. Blue said sometimes it does. So I asked, is it really worth it? We've seen each other 10 or 11 times and I still didn't know Blue's gender, so wasn't it about time? Blue's not ready for that. Apparently I should respect their wishes. But it didn't sound like Blue was respecting my wishes. Blue said my wishes are just motivated by curiosity and impatience, and they don't deserve any respect. So I asked, when am I going to find out? I can't just hang around forever not knowing. And then Blue gets up and leaves. Slams the front door on the way out and runs down the street. I watched from the window. Even from behind, I could tell Blue was in tears. I had a bone to pick with Dad. I told him he wasn't exactly friendly towards Blue. He said that he thought I was bringing my girlfriend home. Mum reminds him that what I actually said was someone special. And then Dad says that my deliberate ambiguity has led to a situation in which he's being accused of being unfriendly. I said I wasn't being ambiguous. I didn't say whether Blue's a boy or a girl because I don't know. I can't tell any more than he can. That's when I get the old, oh, Peter, you do get yourself into some situations. Then Mum asked if it ever came up in conversation. I said of course it came up in conversation, but Blue wants us to get to know each other without the implications of gender, without any labels. Dad says, how very modern. I tell him in future he needs to treat my friends with more courtesy and more respect. Otherwise maybe I'll never bring anyone home ever again. Front doors had a lot of slamming for one day. So I go straight over to Blue's house to apologise. I said that I'm sorry and I didn't mean any of that stuff. I was just being a dick. I was letting my impatience for us to get closer. Blue said what I meant was to fuck. I said, well, that as well, but also in other ways. Blue said that we already are close in other ways. And that really, it was just about sex. Or was it about gender? I admitted that my impatience was clouding my judgment, but I really didn't care about Blue's gender. The one thing I was sure about is that I wanted us to be together. So, Blue calms down and Shows me a portfolio of photographs. Photos of her friend Carol, who's a model. She is stunning. Not bashful. Apparently Blue took them last week. There was one photo of Carol and another model together. Artistic, but it's very erotic, if you see what I mean. I said, in future, if Blue ever needs anyone to hold their exposure meter. Blue asks if I find that exciting, the sight of two beautiful women together. I said, well, no more than most hot-blooded men. Blue asks if I'm hot-blooded, and I said, I think so. And then Blue asked me to prove it. So we start kissing. And this time there's no resistance from Blue. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we start getting our kit off and, well, finally I know. Blue asks if I'm disappointed. I said, oh, definitely not. Now, I expect you'll be wanting to know as well. But you see, the thing is, Blue asked me to promise not to tell anyone else. Just because I know doesn't mean anyone else has to. That way, Blue gets to remain unlabelled, unpigeonholed, uncategorised, and so on, which is fine by me. You see, what we're doing is pretty special. I might be the first person to have fallen in love with someone without knowing their gender. I know sometimes people might find someone attractive when they think they're one gender and then they turn out to be another, but that's different. Even if their relationship survived, which it probably wouldn't, their feelings were based on an assumption, even if it turns out to be wrong. And that's an assumption that comes with a lot of baggage. When I fell in love with Blue, I didn't have any assumptions. I couldn't have. Blue made sure of that. So, after millions of years of people falling in love, we've done it differently. Completely differently. We're unique. And whatever happens, you can't take that away from us.